commission appointed by the mayor and city council to plan for the orderly growth and development of the community, to hold public hearings, and to make recommendations to the city council on planning items. Please note that the city council rules state that the public hearings for planning cases shall be conducted solely by the planning commission. No additional public hearings will be conducted by the city council. Tonight's cases are tentatively scheduled to be heard by the city council next month. Agendas can be found at topeka.org. For cases that require public hearings, the procedure will be as follows. First, the planning department staff will summarize the case. Next, we will hear from the applicant or their representative. Then we will receive public testimony. Public comments should be addressed solely to the chair and are limited to 4 minutes. Chris, please take the roll.
Mr. Armstrong is present.
Here.
Mr. Dean?
Here.
Mr. Freed?
Here.
Mr. Kennard?
Here.
Mr. Kalp?
Here.
Ms. Lawson?
Here.
Ms. Messina? Is Sweet not here yet? Ms. Ringler?
Here.
Okay. And Mr. Warner?
Here.
Okay. We do have 8 and a quorum. I am expecting Ms. Messina, so I'll have to watch for her. That may be her, but now we know everybody's audio is working also. Somebody just logged in who was, or just joined us. Can you tell me who that was?
This is Julie Palma, Ireland.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to rename her real quick. I apologize.
I'm a minute or two late, sorry.
Mr. Finder, do we have any adjustments to the agenda before I move on with approval of minutes?
Mr. Chair, we do have a request to move action item D2 to the top of the agenda. We don't believe, we have no issues with this. We believe that the first item will probably be more lengthy. This one should not be. We have staff present, ready to present, and I don't believe we have any public involved with this one, so this could proceed if commissioners are okay with that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Do we have to vote or do we need any motions?
Only if there's objections from any commissioners would you vote on this. If there's just if there's no objections, then we can proceed with that change.
All right. All right, hearing none, we'll make that adjustment, moving item D2 to the front of the action items list. Next on the agenda, approval of minutes from the March 16th, 2020 meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I will second.
Motion and a second for approval. Chris, will you please take the roll?
Yes, I would, just as a housekeeping item, ask if when you make a motion or a second, if you can speak your name, because it's really hard to tell sometimes who's speaking. But I got Mr. Dean made the motion and Mr. Kalp seconded, is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Mr. Freed?
Aye.
Mr. Kennard?
Aye.
Mr. Kalp?
Aye.
Ms. Lawson?
Aye.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
And Mr. Warner?
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
All right, next up, declaration of conflict of interest, ex parte communications by members of the commission or staff. I will start with this one. I will be logging off video for the now item D1, City of Topeka Water Pollution Control Project. My firm is part of the design team for that. Anyone else? All right, moving on. We will move to item D1, but I will turn that over to Mr. Freed, and I will be back for item D2.
All right. So we will take up item, the new D1, which is CU 2001, and ask that staff proceed with their presentation.
Okay, I think we're unmuted now. So thank you, commissioners. This is Annie Driver, case planner for the project. The request is by the City of Topeka Water Pollution Control Division. They are requesting a conditional use permit that would allow for a public utility facility type 2 for a sanitary sewer pump station on the property that's zoned R2 single family dwelling district. The property is located at the southeast corner of Northeast Jefferson and Northeast Grant. Northeast Grant is unbuilt street right-of-way. The subject site comprises half an acre of land. The Utilities Department is proposing to rebuild and relocate a pump station that was constructed initially in 1927, located just to the north of the subject site in the Grant right-of-way. The new pump station would be approximately 4,250 square foot, approximately 21 feet in height. The current pump station has to remain in operation until the new pump station is built, which is why it has to be moved onto the subject site, as well as it needs additional land. The subject property's been zoned single family since 2000 when the historic North Topeka plan rezoned that from I-1 light industrial. The site has never been developed since it was platted. Section 18250-030 establishes some guidelines for conditional use permit evaluations. They have demonstrated how they adhere to those guidelines. Specifically, the pump station will generate less traffic than a surrounding single family use. They have shown that only one vehicle per week would be accessing the site for regular maintenance. The building demonstrates architectural elements that are reminiscent of the 1927 style building that, from what I understand, was required by City Council when they acquired the property. Public facilities such as sanitary sewer pump stations are necessary in residential zoning districts. The original pump station was constructed in 1927, it's necessary that it be reconstructed and modified. Decibel level would be no more than 55 decibels. Wall signage is limited to 12 square feet. They have also indicated the existing pump station has not had any problematic odor issues, but are designing the pump station to accommodate future odor control measures if needed. The site also allows for stormwater retention. No comments have been received from the neighborhood. Board of Zoning Appeals variances for the setbacks were approved at their May 11th meeting. Staff is recommending approval, subject to one condition for a note being added to the conditional use permit about no discernible odors emitting beyond the property lines. Staff is open for any questions that you may have, and the applicant representatives are here to take any questions that you may have as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone on the commission who has any questions? Okay, I'm not seeing that there's any. I would then ask, is there someone to present on behalf of the application? I'm not hearing if there's anyone.
Yeah, there is. My name's Andrew Wright. Angela Sharp is on the phone, but she's had a little issues getting connected, but I think she's on.
Okay, well, Ms. Wright, do you wish to go ahead?
Yeah, I wasn't really prepared to speak. I could certainly answer any questions if there are any, but
Chris, this is Braxton Copley, Deputy Director of Utilities. Chris, could you just double check to make sure you don't have someone waiting in the lobby? I know Angela had dialed in, was trying to get in.
I do not have anybody in the lobby. I have a phone number that's muted, 785-633-8933. I don't know if that's Angela or not.
it is, she sent me a message and said that the host has her muted.
Okay.
You can't unmute herself.
Muted her.
Okay.
Angela, are you there? Angela, are you there?
Hello? Can you hear me?
There you are.
Hi,
Yes.
Angela.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, fantastic. Finally.
Well, Angela, please go ahead. The staff has presented their report, so if there's any presentation you would like to make on behalf of the application.
Sure. Thank you very much, and I apologize for my technical difficulties. As you've already heard, Braxton Copley is on the phone, as is Andy Wright, the design engineer from Bartlett & West, and Michelle Nicewinder as well, who is the project manager for the Grant Jefferson Pump Station project. And as usual, Annie, I did hear most of Annie's description, and she described the project very thoroughly. But in a nutshell, we're here this evening in basically the third public hearing step in our approval process to provide the constituents of North Topeka with a more reliable and safe wastewater system. First was the condemnation case for the subject property, where the City Council determined that this site is the appropriate site for the required upgrading of the existing Grant Jefferson Pump Station. And the subject property is needed due to the fact that the existing pump station does need to stay in service during the construction of the replacement pump station, so that it then can be turned over, the process is turned over to the new pump station, and the existing at that time would be demolished. Secondly, as Annie just stated, we did last Monday night, had a virtual BZA hearing for this case, and the reason for that was the requirement for a 25-foot building setback on just about on all sides of the subject property. And given its irregular shape and the fact that this is the only site, so this is a unique site that has to be located in this position. And so the Board of Zoning Appeals voted unanimously to approve the variance for the building setbacks to allow the building to be constructed. So this is our third step in the public hearing process before you all, the Planning Commission, for the conditional use permit for the project, so that we can get the zoning in place to allow this improvement for these residents of North Topeka. And I think our application had a lot of information in it. One thing that we have looked at as a part of the overall review process is the stormwater treatment that is shown on the conditional use permit documents, and then on some subsequent documents that we have submitted. And when we originally created those documents, we were looking conservatively at the stormwater treatment and sized the retention pond that's shown on site accordingly. And since that time, we have found that we probably are going to be able to reduce the size of that pond. So that would be one change that, as we go through the final building permitting and final stages of the process, could change slightly from the size that's shown on the documents today. So with that, we would like to hear any questions you might have for us. And Braxton, Michelle, and Andy are all here to answer any design technical questions, process, or regulatory issue type questions.
Okay, thank you. Are there any members of the commission who have any questions of the applicants? Making sure I'm seeing everybody in case anyone I'm not seeing anyone requesting the opportunity to ask questions, making sure that's accurate before I move this on. All right, well, thank you very much. Would now be open for public comment. If anyone from the public would like to comment, if you could please identify yourself, and then we can move forward. All right, I am not hearing that there is anyone from the public wishing to comment. So we will then close the public hearing at this time. And there will be no further public comments received. Are there any further questions from any members of the commission for the staff? All right, not seeing anyone has any commissions. I would then call for a motion on the item.
Based on
Commissioner
the
Kanar? I would, based on the findings and analysis in the staff report, I move to recommend approval to the governing body of the conditional use permit CU 2001, subject to the conditions stated in the staff report.
And that's Commissioner Kanar.
Yes.
Is there a second?
It's Commissioner Lawson, and I would second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Chris, can we take a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Armstrong?
He's abstaining, I believe, on this one.
Okay, sorry. Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Mr. Freed?
Aye.
Mr. Kanar?
Aye.
Mr. Kelp?
Did you get that? Aye.
Okay. Ms. Lawson?
Aye.
Ms. Messina?
Aye.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
And Mr. Warner?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 8-0 with one abstaining.
All right, and thank you. That takes care of this matter. And if Commissioner Armstrong is listening, he is free to rejoin the meeting at this time and take over the controls of the ship.
Thank you, sir. He is back. All right, on to action item D2. PUD 19/02 Sports Zone PUD by TNL Land Company LLC, requesting to amend the district zoning map from R1 Single Family Dwelling District with an existing conditional use permit for outdoor recreational fields, retail sales, and food service, and existing special use permits for private membership club with golf courses and community building with alcohol sales, all to PUD planned unit development O&I 2 uses with limited I1 uses on a 23-acre property located at 3907 and 3909 Southwest Burlingame Road. Continued from September 2019 public hearing. Ms. Driver?
Okay. Thank you, commissioners. So as you all may recall, this item was first heard by the Planning Commission at their September 16th, 2019 hearing. It was deferred at that meeting to give staff and applicants some time. There were issues raised about truck traffic from the Kansas Department of Revenue and the White Line Training School. The item was postponed from subsequent meetings at the request of the applicant. In response to staff's requirements, the applicant held a second meeting with the neighborhood on Monday, January 27th. Originally, they intended to bring this back to the April Planning Commission meeting. However, that was again postponed by the applicant due to current circumstances. Some new information is in your packet tonight related to this case. Specifically, I want to point those out. There is a memo from the Kansas Department of Revenue, which details how many trips per trucks are using and accessing their site on Tract A. There's another letter from the White Line School There are a couple of documents related to that January 27th meeting, one from Kevin Holland, as well as the attendance sheet. There is meeting minutes from Matt Massalinas. There is another letter dated February 18th from Matt Massalinas. There are some additional materials in your packet dated May 5th from both the Massalinases and the Palmas. There is some more photos that were not sent to you in your packet, but were forwarded to you by email today from Miss Julie Palma Ireland, as well as some letters dated September 5th and a letter dated May 5th. And that includes some photos of trucks on the property. I want to go over in my bullet points in the front of the staff report some key changes that are on the current draft of PUD that's before you tonight and that the applicant has agreed to. The first bullet point relates to the north entrance driveway. So the applicant has agreed that any access across that driveway for semi-tractor trailers would be prohibited if the PUD is approved. They work with the city's traffic engineer to place signs at both Burlingame Road and at the public frontage road intersection to direct those semi-trucks to the south entrance for exit and entering. That is the entrance. It's approximately 800 foot south along Burlingame. For Tract A uses, the owners have agreed to eliminate parking for semi-tractor trailers on Tract A. The private truck driver school and DMV will not use Tract A for on-site testing or the parking of trucks. That case history related to the zoning is on page 6 of the staff report. Under the proposed zoning, the PUD would allow O&I 2 uses on Tract A, does allow the continued use of the building for an office, as well as the use of the building for a daycare and dance studio, which are complementary to the use of the sports zone on Tract B. Related for the point noted about Tract B for current uses, semi-tractor trailer trucks may only use the south entrance. The White Line School would continue to park and test on Tract B with access only by the south entrance. For Tract E, any future uses. So if there is a change of use or a new addition proposed to allow one of the allowed industrial uses that are stated on the PUD plan, then all use of the north driveway will be restricted for only emergency responders. So that's police, ambulance, and fire. And at that time, the applicant would have to submit the planning department with a site plan showing how that access is gated and fenced for Tract B. The uses that would be allowed if the PUD is approved on Tract B would be specifically enclosed warehousing and storage, contractor shops, self-storage facilities type 1 and type 2, and artisan manufacturing that is defined in 1855 to include products that are primarily made by hand with little or no use of equipment and machinery. There is also a note related to Tract B uses stating any outside display and storage of products, equipment, and machinery is prohibited. Tract B would also allow indoor and outside recreation. And just a couple of notes. If you recall, the intent of the PUD rezoning was to allow the owner to market Tract B and Tract C for some light industrial uses and provide an office zoning on Tract A. This PUD narrowly defines industrial zoning that would be allowed on Tract B. The land use and zoning history is documented on page 6 of the staff report. Page 7 outlines conditions related to traffic. The PUD master plan requires that future access on Burlingame be reviewed by traffic engineering for consistency to city design specifications. If there's a new addition or change of use, in order to determine the need for a developer-initiated traffic impact study to assess the need for roadway improvements. Our city traffic engineer indicated that this TIA is usually best accomplished when there's a specific project at hand. However, the traffic engineer also attended the January 27th meeting, and based on the outcome of that meeting, engineering is looking at and has contacted a consultant to initiate a traffic analysis at the intersection to assess the crash history and traffic volume concerns of the residents. From my understanding, that analysis is on hold right now because I believe the sports zone is just getting back up in operation. On pages 9 through 12, staff had considered the golden criteria. Those are outlined in the staff report. And staff is recommending approval, subject to conditions in the staff report. Staff is here to answer any questions that you may have, and the applicants, I believe, are on the call to take your questions as well. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mike Hall, Planning Manager. I had a few comments to make, just some discussion that happened last week. Last week on the 13th, we conducted a virtual meeting with the neighboring property owners. This meeting was conducted to better inform the property owners and also to allow them to ask questions and express concerns. Staff wanted to provide them with the opportunity to have a conversation with us prior to this Planning Commission meeting so we could explain the most recent proposal and just respond to questions. At least 4 of the neighboring owners and residents participated along with their legal counsel, Vernon Jarbo. The owners expressed that the rezoning case should not be considered because of the many current code violations on the property. And as they said, there is a low level of confidence in the applicants following the rules of any new zoning based on the applicant's history of not following current and past regulations. And I'm trying to paraphrase their comments. Those are not necessarily staff's. So the enforcement of the current regulations and the proposed rezoning are both important but separate elements. And they really need to be looked at somewhat separately. They're highly related, obviously, but they need to be looked at separately. So first of all, enforcement. When a zoning case is under consideration, the compliance issues and the enforcement are generally put on hold until the zoning case is resolved. That's not to say that the city cannot exercise some enforcement. The city can and will decide how to administer enforcement apart from the zoning case. Enforcement can be done now to address those activities clearly not allowed on the property, such as outdoor storage and a truck driving school. There's a lot of discussion of the DMV operation on Tract A. The DMV operation is not clearly allowed by the current zoning of the property. It typically requires O&I2 zoning. But as a state-run operation, was not considered to be subject to zoning regulations at the time it began in 2012. Building permits were approved for the remodel of the building on Tract A at or around that time, around 2012. As a government services use, the DMV operation is allowed under the O&I2 zoning proposed for the PUD. So that addresses enforcement. Now, for the zoning case, the proposed PUD in your packet is substantially different from the PUD you considered in September 2019. The information coming out of the September hearing indicated the main concerns of neighboring owners and residents to be the heavy truck traffic on the site, the use of the north entrance, and the concern that potential new industrial uses would exacerbate the problems related to truck traffic. At least that's what we got out of the meeting primarily. Following the September meeting, we recommended to the applicant that they revise the PUD master plan to address those issues. After much discussion on at least 2 versions, the proposed PUD master plan, unlike the September version, takes tractor trailer truck use off of Tract A. It restricts future tractor trailer trucks to using the south entrance. It prohibits outdoor storage of materials and equipment on tracks A and B, and requires, if there is a change of use on Track B to an I-1 light industrial use allowed by the PUD, that there be a physical barrier to prevent access to Track B from the north entrance except for emergency response. The PUD also requires, in the event of a substantial change of use, that 20-foot landscape buffer be installed along the east boundaries of tracks A and B. So staff will acknowledge that the proposed PUD is not an error-free, fail-safe solution to the truck traffic at the north entrance. It really, if that was to be implemented, it would rely on information from the owners or tenants, the applicants or tenants, to their tenants and their customers to use the south entrance. It would also rely on signage that would be determined mainly from the traffic engineer working with the applicant. The actual signage that directs truck traffic to the south entrance will be determined by the city's traffic engineer working with the applicants. So this is a difficult case, obviously. What we've tried to do is balance the interests of the applicants and the neighboring owners, because that's really what the golden factors try to do. There have been a lot of changes. I want to emphasize that. There have been some issues raised that might suggest some alternatives to our recommendation. We acknowledge those as well. Mr. Jarbo, the neighbor's legal counsel, has suggested some conditions that could be placed on this that better protect neighboring residents. And I think that that's one outcome of this process, is to consider new information, new suggestions and recommendations. So just wanted to explain that, and before you deliberate on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Hall. Questions for staff, commissioners?
I do have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
So this switch of the, or restriction of the traffic from the north entrance to the south entrance, as I read this, the entrance to the south comes through an agreement between the owners of that property and the current properties, and isn't directly to the current applicant's property. Do we know if the change in conditions or the requirements of this will cause a problem with that agreement?
I'll try to answer it. You might need to get some information from the applicant themselves. So the applicant they're willing to live with the changes to this PUD. So my understanding is they check that to make sure that that the access easement will work for the properties as intended by the PUD.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kopp.
Thank you. Mr. Hall, I'm also interested in this north driveway issue. I may not have heard everything you said, but is it correct that that these signs are just, they're not signs by the city of Topeka to restrict the accessing the one entryway? Is that right?
They would have to be approved by the city of Topeka. That's, they would be private signs, but they'll have to be approved by the city of Topeka traffic engineer. And
is there a reason, Addie, is there a reason why they are private signs instead of signs that can be enforced by the city?
From my I think a lot of this is left open to the analysis that will need to be done. But from my understanding is it's access for a private development. So I think the private signs are something that our engineering division would recommend.
Well, I understand it's a recommendation, but what I'm asking, is there any reason why there can't be a city of Topeka sign on the public right-of-way that prohibits certain types of traffic turning onto that one access point?
Mr. Kalp, I'm going to try to help with this a little bit. by private signs, I believe they'll be paid for by the owner or the owners.
Right.
But they, I believe, and Annie, correct me if I'm wrong, they have to be, I think it's called the METCD standard for signage. Do they have to meet the METCD standard, Annie? Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding.
So they will be a typical road sign that is recognized by traffic professionals.
Okay, so if I turn on to that exit, that entryway, I can be ticketed by the city police. Is that right?
I don't know if we can answer that question. I would think, I don't know the answer to that question. And keep in mind that the way the PUD is proposed to you right now, it would prohibit trucks, not necessarily other traffic.
Right, it'd be a sign that would say truck traffic prohibited, and it would be subject to a penalty, and a ticket and a fine.
And I don't know the answer to that question if the police could enforce it or if it would be enforced in some other manner.
Okay, I think I'll come back to that later. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have one question, Annie or Mr. Hall. The traffic study that is about to pick back up once the sports zone's in use, the findings of that will help guide the signing plan then recommended for the applicant. Is that correct? Am I reading that right then?
That is my understanding, yes.
Primarily for the signage.
Yes, for the signage.
Thank you. Other questions for staff? Hearing none, we will call for a presentation by the applicant, followed by questions from the commission. Mr. Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kevin Holland, Cook Flat and Strobel Engineers. And I'm more or less just here to answer questions. I think Annie and Michael did a very good job of explaining the route that we've taken and gone from here. The access to the south, we do have full accessibility. So that is not an issue if we're to put trucks on that route. Actually, if the city wants to put signage, our applicant does not have any issue with that. Here with me in our room, which you can't see probably on camera, are the owners John Ostrowski and Tom Schmidtline. So if you need any answers specifically by the owners, they are here for those. But like I said, this facility was purchased in the late 90s. The arena was constructed around 2001 and has provided a lot of kids, thousands of kids every year, the ability to go and do a recreational sport in a controlled environment, which in the city of Topeka, I think is priceless. But now we have a couple of owners that are getting to the age where they don't want to they want options and flexibility to what happens to this facility in the future. If this facility stays exactly the same as it is right now, they would be completely happy. But if it goes on the sale block, they want a little flexibility on who can buy it and what they can do. And I would love to say we have a specific plan of what's coming in here, but it is truly speculative and we have no buyer, no plan, and nothing on the books of what's going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. Questions from the commission?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Commissioner Lawson. Is there a reason why this can't wait until the traffic analysis is completed, since the primary concern of the residents is this traffic?
Well, I would say that we have been waiting for 9 months and pretty patiently going forward, but I don't know that what the traffic study is going to conclude, that any and I could defer to a traffic engineer, but any industry that's going to come in is going to have less traffic than the sports zone arena that's generating all of the traffic on the north entrance. That's the original CUP was designated for. From a traffic study signage standpoint, our applicant is more than happy to work with the city to put the signs up, or have the city put the signs up in the right of way as well to show trucks where to go, to show traffic where to go, and more than happy to help that out.
Any other questions from the commission?
I've got one.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Holland, how many trucks go in and out of this on a daily basis?
On the DMV, we get 3 to 4 trucks a day. And what that is a truck comes in to do testing, and then that truck leaves. And that's the truck, the signage that's needed for the north entrance so that they don't come into the north entrance. The other trucks already use the south entrance because we have White Lion controls all of their trucks. So anybody that drives for that facility knows they have to come into south entrance and leave the south entrance. It's already doing today. The more difficult function is those 3 to 4 trucks coming in to get their driver's state driving test, and they're trying to come. It's a little, probably needs to be a little more clear for the signage on the south entrance of how to get there and close that north entrance off with signage.
Is the sport zone still operational? I mean, besides the COVID thing?
Yeah. COVID has, like all of us sitting here in our offices versus in the commission chambers, they will be back in action, and I believe leagues are paying applications now. They're planning for a summer season.
And do you know on the DMV site who? Do you know when their lease happens to be up? Is it coming up pretty soon? Is it?
State? Yeah. Long term.
It's a long-term lease. 10 years.
9 to go.
9 technically to go.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Kopp, did you have another question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Holland, I was looking at your write-up of the neighborhood citizen participation report that's in our file. And have you seen the write-up that was submitted on February 18 of this year by Matt? I butchered the name up, but it's offered to us as a set of minutes or the proceedings of that public neighborhood meeting, citizen participation report. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do, sir.
Well, comparing the two documents, yours is quite cursory, I would say. Do you know of anything obviously the document that was submitted by Matt is coming at from perspective of the neighborhoods or the neighbors, but is there anything in that set of neighborhood meeting minutes from January 27 that you think is materially wrong?
From his,
anything you take exception to?
I would have to go back and read his, and I don't want to say, but he was very combative in the meeting. So the meeting was not a back and forth. It was a lecture towards us. So it was difficult to necessarily glean whether or not the information was. I tried to basically write the meeting minutes that said neighbors were in opposition. They were not happy with what's going on. They were angry about the trucks. Truck traffic was information that we had gotten from the first public information meeting. Wasn't a major issue. And then when we went to the planning commission meeting, that's when we learned about the truck issue, went back to the drawing board to try to help that situation out. So I would have to review those comments back to glean whether or not there's accurate. But I think I made my notes, submitted them to Annie, and talked through it to made sure they were reflective of how I thought the meeting went.
But you would acknowledge that the write-up that I'm referring to is much more detailed as to what the neighbors' concerns were.
Well, and whether or not those concerns are completely told to you, it was, he's lived there with his parents have lived there a long time. So their complaints, whether or not they were described, would be much more in detail than an outsider talking about a situation. So the meeting wasn't necessarily a clean back and forth discussion.
Is it accurate that the meeting lasted around a half an hour? That was the extent of that meeting?
I do not believe so. I believe, and Annie, if you could, or Michael, I know we're both there. I believe that meeting was about an hour and 15 minutes.
Well, the write-up says that it started at 5:15 and that it was cut off at 5:45 when the owner of the property needed to, or the lessee needed to close the building.
I believe that is inaccurate. Actually, the lessee said they're supposed to close the building at 6, but they did leave us for another, I believe, 25 minutes after that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions by the commission at this point? All right, hearing none, we will go ahead and open the public meeting. I will call for public comments. Each speaker, I guess, raise your hand or speak up. We'll try to take you. Matt first to raise his hand. We'll take him first. You do have 4 minutes. I think Chris will be timing the 4 minutes. We won't be able to give you the 1 minute warning like you would typically receive in the commission chambers, but if you do go past 4 minutes, Chris will jump in and you would have to request an extension at that point. Hold on, my screen shuffled around. There we go. Matt, it's all yours.
Before my timer starts, can I just address the meeting notes question that came up? At last fall's meeting, there was, my mother was there, my brother was there, and they had voiced definitely negative opinions about the development. And Kevin said it would be noted in the notes. If you go back to look at September's neighborhood meeting notes, you'll find that there was no issues and the neighbors were fine with the plan. So I did address the questions and made sure the notes were distributed in according. The meeting was supposed to start at 4 o'clock. No one had a meeting room available. So we stood outside and then we went inside and stood in the lobby for literally about half an hour, waiting for a room to get opened up. We got in there, then we were still waiting for some other people to show up. The meeting did not start until 5:15. It was supposed to start at 4. It did not start till 5:15, and we were shuttled out of there at 5:45. So with that, you'll see that Chris put something up on the board. That's my response, basically my summary response of one sheet of my 88 pages. But I wanted to say thank you to the Planning Commission for allowing me to speak tonight. Regarding this application, it's obviously very concerning to my family as they desire to live their lives in the peace and security that the R1 zoning is meant to provide residents. I also appreciate the efforts that the planning staff has expended to prepare this application for your review tonight, which I have faith that it will be denied and or remanded this evening. My name is Matt Massalonis. I'm one of Margaret's 7 children, and she's asked me to speak on her behalf tonight. I live in Overland Park, Kansas, and I'm an architect who specializes in commercial real estate design work nationally with my firm, Reese Massalonis Turley, based in Mission Woods, Kansas. Following this evening will be Julie Ireland, representing her parents, Robert Massalonis, representing the Foster Cemetery, Daniel Massalonis, speaking on behalf of Margaret, and we'll close with Vernon Jarbo of the Sloan Law Firm. You'll see I've provided a history packet at the very back end of my summary, but The history of the land ownership started with the Foster family, goes all the way back to the 1850s with our family ancestors, Perry and Freeman Foster, who were instrumental in helping create the city of Topeka. And they served as representatives in the state of Kansas as well, and they're buried in the Foster Cemetery. Francis Foster, my grandfather, helped zone this property with the city in 1950, in the 50s, and developed the land for his siblings, as well as creating a community benefit with the Knights of Columbus and its associated family-based programs. My mother, Margaret, continues to reside at 3901 Burlingame Road. My father passed away several years ago. She also owns 3903 Burlingame Road, where her parents and her sister used to live, which she now rents to her niece. My aunt and uncle, John and Rosemary Palmer, reside at 3905 Burlingame Road. And my brother, Bob, manages and maintains the Foster Cemetery, one of the oldest cemeteries in Topeka, established in 1855 as the board president. Julie Ireland also sits on the board. In short, our family's histories run deep in the city of Topeka, and they've been excellent long-term citizens of Topeka and great caretakers of the land for over 160 years. The issues with the application are fivefold, and they're all conflicts with the Topeka Municipal Code and future land use, as I've documented in my extensive, and I'm sorry it was so deep, but I'm trying to provide as much detail as possible, knowing that, that we're dealing with remotely. First one, the owner applicant has shown a complete disregard for years in abiding by the Topeka Municipal Code, including the zoning uses and conditions placed upon the property by the city. Even after they've been formally notified from the homeowner discussions and planning meetings, they have done nothing to rectify the violations. The owner continues to violate the special and conditional uses placed on the R1 property by placing non-conforming uses in and on the site for their own financial benefit while ignoring the contractual obligations to the city. The owners place non-compliant uses, which use heavy trucks and equipment on the site, who use the northern entrance from Burlingame, which has created dangerous conflicts of traffic from the owner's private street to my mother and the homeowner's private access street. The staff report notes that if a change of uses or a substantial addition is proposed on parcel B, the applicant will be required to submit a site plan showing a gate and fence that limits the traffic. Of note, the zoning and code violations of truck and traffic have been occurring for years now and can continue to today. And the owner's done nothing to abide by the laws. So how can the city allow an owner to conform now or in the future when they've shown no ability to conform in the law for the past years? And then if a gate's needed to protect the homeowners from the zoning violation, why is one not installed now, since the owner's been ignorant of the laws? Also, after it's installed, who will monitor the use and the operations of the gate so it's performing its duty with an owner who has been ignorant in abiding by the city codes? Second one, the primary issues of the application that Margaret Masalonis articulated still remain unaddressed. That remains the lack of compliance with the neighborhood meeting requirements. Part of that is to resolve the concerns before the Planning Commission meeting. However, the applicant has done nothing to address the neighbors' concerns in September or in January. And I take slight offense to the fact that staff is saying that there was major changes. We look at the changes as very slight. And slight is probably the correct term I would use. No details have been answered by the owner applicant as to specific uses, plan locations, or the detailed relationships to the neighbor.
Excuse me, can you hear me? I'm sorry, but I just need to let you know the 4 minutes is up, so the timer's
Understood. This is 160 years that I'm trying to compose down, so I apologize. But please give me the levity to finish my statements, please. Also, per the application, the PUD is noted in the TMC. They are supposed to provide a traffic circulation pattern within the development. The areas to be developed for parking and a maximum height.
Excuse me, this is Bill Fyander. The commission can extend your time.
Yes.
So Mr. Chair, you and the commission are the only ones that can extend an approved time beyond the 4 minutes. You can do so, but you have to take some action. Do you know how much more time you need?
I'm just over halfway.
Yeah, I would be okay with another 4-minute extension to finish Matt's presentation.
Thank you.
I'll agree.
Yes.
Can I continue?
Please do.
Okay.
Do we need to take a vote?
No, yeah, you need to take a vote.
Ah,
Chris, do you want to call the roll? Okay, the request is to extend the time for 4 minutes. Mr. Armstrong?
aye.
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Mr. Freed?
Aye.
Mr. Kanar?
Aye.
Mr. Kalp?
Aye.
Ms. Lawson?
Aye.
Ms. Messina?
Aye.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
And Mr. Warner?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 9-0.
You may continue, Matt.
Thank you. The application creates an encroachment of incompatible uses to the existing R1 zoning, which the Topeka Municipal Code identifies as R1 use is for housing and living purposes, free from the encroachment of incompatible uses. The application is not in compliance with the city's future land plan, as it details as its parks, open space, and recreation for tracks A and B. Keep in mind that they've also placed in this application that they're they're going from the least restrictive use to one of the most restrictive uses within this. And I would think that you'd want to take a step and say, evaluate the Topeka future land use plan and evaluate that before you proceed forward with the PUD plan. Third, the requested change from the low density R1 to the industrial uses in the O and I2 and I1s is a major density change in use from the R1, and it creates conflicting uses down the road with the Topeka municipal zoning. Once the zoning change occurs, we all know that that means that whoever's going to be coming in will say, okay, I know that's zoned for that, but how about this? And my worry is that it's zoned for an R1 now. We have an owner who's not been abiding by the law. And it's just going to continue on as keep pushing the envelope. The staff notes in number 4 that the change in use should be allowed so the owner can market the property for their personal gain. However, they purchase the property with this zoning in place and the conditional uses. In lieu of rewarding them, shouldn't we kind of remand them? The owners never marketed the property for sale, nor reached out to the homeowners to discuss future uses, nor completed any marketing or real estate analysis to validate their requested change in use. So how can a summary assumption be made to change the uses in the application without any proper research and investigation providing validations as such? And finally, per the discussion or the Topeka Municipal Code of 18.235.050, the application is required to submit full landscape plans, which is missing from the application and is critical for the proper evaluation and determination of the proper buffer zones, the intended uses, the traffic zones the PUD must provide. It also says that the landscape plans must be submitted at the time of application for a building permit and also at the time of application for a planned unit development and conditional use permits. That is a really big item for all the homeowners. We need to know what's happening between and the R1 and the other uses. In summary, we feel that the application is flawed from a municipal code and planning perspective and harmful to the long-standing homeowners. Further, the application, its uses are in conflict with the municipal codes and the Topeka future land use. The owner applicant has not provided the details required of the PUD application. They did not provide any justification for the use and change, or the change in use, and provided any supporting documentation. So please help the honest and caring homeowners who've abided by all the laws of the government and who've had significant historical heritage with the city and deny this application and require the owner to abide by the laws of our government so the homeowners can return to living in the protected nature that the R1 zoning should provide. I appreciate your time in reviewing these items and request that after review of the conflicts and issues that you deny this application this evening. Thank you.
Commissioners, questions for Mr. Massalonis?
Mr. Chairman, are you wanting to have questions of each of the parties speaking tonight, or will there be an opportunity to come back to people after all of the members of the public have spoken?
Mr. Commissioner, if I can interrupt, I think the next 3 will be fairly short and Vernon will conclude, and we can then open up for questions if that's preferable.
I would be fine with that. Is Vince next or Daniel?
Julie Ireland.
Julie Ireland. All right, Julie, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Julie Palma Ireland, and I'm representing my 87 and 84-year-old parents who in their lovely R1 zone try to go to sleep in the evenings with a neon sign blinking and changing outside their bedroom window, only to be awakened in the mornings by a semi grinding its gears as it passes about 15 feet from their home of 62 years. I challenge you to show us another R1 in our capital city with this kind of problem. Yet these are the people, us who live at 3905 Burlingame Road, whose letters and photos were not included by your staff in your Friday packet for this hearing. That's incredible, especially since I asked Annie specifically at the close of Thursday's Zoom meeting if they would be included and was told they would be. Now, there are only 3 houses and only 2 homeowners. Yet one of the 2 homeowners, the people closest to the driveway where all this is happening, we still strongly oppose any change in zoning letter was left out. It definitely appears someone is stacking the deck for the applicant, and we just don't understand why. The traffic is a huge problem. Making the trucks use the north entrance, how would this be enforced? It wouldn't. Remember, the trucks are not allowed at all in the beginning, and that was never enforced. Commissioner Kopp tried to address the concern of this enforcement. I called Becky Isopai on March 4th about having the property inspected for zoning violations and was told since it's before the commission, they wouldn't inspect. But then at the meeting Thursday, we, the homeowners, were asked what businesses were not in compliance. Isn't that backwards? You guys should know that. If anyone had read our letter, we clearly stated the commercial driver's license renewal is not in compliance. The White Line semi-driving school is not in compliance. And the daycare center is not in compliance. They all violate the current zoning. If you allow more lenience to this applicant, how will it be enforced? They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Our photos, which you guys have and we're supposed to put up for me, they show what's going on. Please read our letter, look at the pictures, and pretend you live in my childhood home at 3905 Burlingame Road. As you see, there's maintenance on semis. There's a old mattress thrown out. There's all these the semis, they drop off their storage part and leave it back there. I mean, it's a mess. And the one there that you're seeing, the other side of those trees is our property line. I mean, it's right there. Those are the houses, and they have the sign saying semi-tractor parking right by our property. So if you're out at the back part of my parents' house, you got the semi right there. And the last picture, it shows they drop off their cargo and leave it down there. And then the semi part goes out, comes back, picks it up. And I would definitely challenge the idea that Mr. Holland said that there's only 3 or 4 a day, because I'm not in Topeka all the time, but many, many days I'm there, and there are a lot more than 3 or 4 going up and down right by my parents' house. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate your time.
Do you have a second? Bob, do you have time to talk? Or are you muted?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Robert Massalonis, and I'm speaking for myself. Was born and raised here on Burlingame Road at 3901, and followed my mom. She was the president of Foster Cemetery for many, many years. I took that over as of about 3 or 4 years ago, trying to follow in her footsteps to maintain a cemetery that runs basically on donations only. We don't have a large fund of money. It's basically donations only. And I want everybody to really think, most everybody has plans of what their plans are for their final resting place. Can anybody think of somewhere quiet? I can't think of any cemetery that isn't quiet. Well, Foster Cemetery is now beginning to be not quiet. I had a resident come out that actually purchased a plot that made a comment to me the other day and said, you know, I remember the cemetery was quiet. And I looked at him and said, because they bought a plot many, many years ago and were just out visiting the area. But we had the highway come across many years ago, caused a lot more noise. Okay, that's understandable. We had the gas station come in to the south of the cemetery, which I've had to deal with the owner there of damaging fences with tractor trailer trucks, et cetera, and then not saying, well, how do we know we did it? Which I know my residents take care of the fence inside. And then lately we have now the seventh pole from it would be the southwest corner that basically goes up against track B that now is damaged from the machinery on track B. Nobody ever told us anything about it, and it's now damaged, which, like, again, my residents haven't done anything to it. You know, I'm very concerned about what this cemetery is going to be like 5-10 years from now. With the track B now wanting to be light commercial, I don't know who would want to rest in a cemetery, their final resting place, and have noise all around them, tractors, everything, who knows what. And I'm very disappointed and would want this thing to be voted against. And I speak for all the board members and all my residents in the cemetery and there to come. I thank you for your time.
All right. Dan, did you want to speak next? Daniel?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Daniel Massalonis. I represent Margaret Massalonis, as well as the property of 3903 Burlingame Road. I've been into real estate rental property for the past 20 to 25 years here in Kansas City. When we acquired the property next door to her, I took over that responsibility. Over the past 20 years, dealing with Johnson County and Wyandotte County, I've always followed regulations, guidelines, all the stuff with both city in Wyandotte and Johnson County. And with Topeka too, knowing who I can put in there, I can't put daycares, I can't put all that stuff in to make sure I'm under the guidance and regulations that are brought out by the city. I don't object when they first bought the property, they bought it under the R1 with the special use. They built the sports zone, which is great for Topeka. We never objected to that. T&J Properties, sometime shortly after that is when they went outside their guidelines and they signed a contract with the city and get the truck driving school in there. That was their own personal decision to do that. It never went to any board commission. We had no idea that they even did that. We were told that they could do that or whatever after the fact. They have a daycare center in there that shouldn't be in there because it's not zoned for that. And the truck driving school, they chose to put that in there, sneaking it behind our backs, the city's backs. They made that decision and now they're just wanting to move forward and push it through like they've done nothing wrong. I suggest that the council denies this request that they're asking for. Let's go back and deny this, and then we can have them get in compliance before we move to the next step and show us their good faith, and do something right for 6 months to a year, and then let's move forward and follow the current guidelines and move forward. We don't trust them because personally, I think they're just businessmen. They want to just get it turned over and sell it and make their money because they're getting close to retirement, as they said. They really don't care what happens past that. The owners or whatever, we're going to be involved in this property for another 20 to 30 years, as long as I'm alive. Thanks for their time.
Thanks. All right, Vernon, the floor is yours. Vernon?
I thought Chris unmuted me. I didn't realize I was in charge of that. Thank you, members of the commission and Mr. Chairman. Vernon Jarbo, I'm an attorney with Sloan Law Firm in Topeka. Masalonis family contacted me some months ago to look into this. And kind of as a general observation, I'd like to start off with, where this is today. Right now, there's a conditional use permit. And pursuant to the city code, conditional use permits can be revoked. Chris, did you share my memo to the Planning Commission with them, or is it up on? You gonna put it up on the screen, or how are we doing that?
It's up there now. Is this what you're talking about?
That's what I'm talking about. Very good. So my memo starts off with the point that a conditional use permit can be revoked if the user is violating it. Clearly, in this case, the user is violating it. And so, from my perspective, you ought to revoke it so that we're back to dealing with a straight zoning case. Now, you need to keep in mind that if they treat a planned unit development, assuming you were to approve this, the same way they've treated this conditional use permit, you cannot revoke that. Then we would be stuck with regular enforcement of zoning rules. So in section 1, and note that I say the highlighted terms in my document are straight from the staff report. So that first paragraph is what they're asking for. And so they're asking, they have suggested that they put in fencing, but not until they have some change in the current use. Well, first of all, current use, of course, is illegal. But beyond that, in answer to Mr. Kaup's question about whether or not the city would be able to enforce the law against trucks who would pull into the driveway, contrary to the signage, my judgment is they would not. I think that's the reason Mr. Kaup was asking the question. It's just no one else would venture an answer. But I can tell you what would stop trucks from pulling in that entrance. If the fence were built and they couldn't get to tract B, they would only pull in the wrong entrance once, because then they'd have to turn around in that parking lot on tract A and get out of there so they could come in on the south entrance where they're supposed to be. So if you want to stop it, the sure way to stop it is require the fence right now. As Matt said, I think another important issue here is the landscape area. The proposed landscape area is 20 feet wide. That's what it shows on the plans. That's about the length of my wife's pickup. It's slightly longer than my car, but the answer is it isn't much. And if what you're talking about is semi trucks in your backyard, as some of the pictures depict, or parked next to the fence for the cemetery, that's not there is no room to create a 20-foot, or in 20 feet, there's no room to create a landscape barrier that would adequately protect this property. And I think that why 20 feet? I don't know why 20 feet. I mean, I've been doing this in the city of Topeka for a long time. In the 1980s, the first project I remember doing a landscape barrier was 100 feet, and that was between offices and residential. This is industrial and residential, and this is, for point of reference, ladies and gentlemen, this is a 1 million square foot tract of land. This isn't some small piece of dirt in which 100 feet is going to make a lot of difference. This is a very large tract. There's plenty of room to do something. Well, so Chris, how do I scroll down? Do you have to do that for me? The second highlighted piece here, which is just 2 lines long, it's talking about this entrance out on the public intersection. I think it's really important that you understand that the frontage road in front of these 3 homes and in front of the cemetery is a public road. This driveway that's coming out of the sports zone, the north entrance as it's been called, that's a private drive entering into a public road. And if you go back to the conditional use permit that was originally approved, which Annie provided to me today, Note 11 in the CUP says there will be a stop sign there. So there's been some debate about whether or not we have to have a traffic engineer tell us what kind of signage. We don't need to know that. We already have that. Now, some of the writings from the neighbors would indicate that it was, in fact, one of the applicants who removed the stop sign and put in a yield sign. It certainly wasn't us, and I don't think it was any of the residents at the cemetery. We've already indicated they're not real active. So how did we end up with a yield sign instead of a stop sign when the conditional use permit specifically says a stop sign?
So hang on just a second. Sorry, the 4 minutes is up, so sorry I couldn't get anybody's attention. Just need to the 4 minutes is up, so.
I would request, I think I can finish in 4.
All right, I would make that motion. Chris, another 4-minute extension for Mr. Jarbo. Please take the roll.
Okay. Mr. Warner?
Aye.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
Ms. Messina?
Aye.
Ms. Lawson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelp?
Aye.
Great. I'm sorry, Mr. Kennard?
Posted.
Aye.
Traffic signal.
Mr. Reed?
Property.
Aye.
Are enforced.
Mr. Bean?
Aye.
And Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 9-0.
Thank you, commissioners. Chris, can you scroll down again, please? Paragraph 2 talks about the buffer. Paragraph 3 talks about the traffic analysis. And the statement by staff last week about why the traffic analysis had not been done is because we don't yet know what use the owner is going to make of an industrial nature. And until we know that use, we can't do a traffic analysis. Well, that kind of begs the question. If they weren't already doing industrial uses, we wouldn't be having this conversation, would we? We're having this conversation because they're already engaged in industrial uses. They've made that change. And so to say that we're not going to do the traffic analysis until they've made a change over to this more intense industrial use, which is the same answer we got on the landscape buffer in terms of why they don't have to do it. Well, what an interesting ploy. You do whatever, you get zoning, a conditional use permit, you do whatever you want, more significant than that. And then after the fact, you come back and say, oh, don't enforce it because I'm going to go ahead and apply for something new. And I'm not going to provide the things I'm supposed to, traffic impact analysis and landscape buffer, because I don't know what I'm doing yet. Well, you know what? If they don't know what they're doing yet, then why are we engaged in this rezoning? And as Matt said, there is no evidence that they've actually tried to use this property for anything. Chris, can you scroll down, please? In paragraph 5, the statement of intended use and the reason we have a PUD as opposed to something else is so that protection for the landowners can be provided. And my question is, shouldn't that protection be now? If they really want to do this, you should continue this, give them enough time to come back with a traffic analysis and a landscape plan so that this can be properly considered. And the final points in my analysis start with the golden criteria, the character of the neighborhood. We're talking about a use that has come in to an area where homes have existed for 150 years, as Matt said. What's the zoning? Well, the nearby properties in this case are zoned residential. Now, is there some industrial zoning further to the south? Yes, there is. And if this case dealt with the zoning of Tract C, this would be a completely different argument, but we're here talking about the zoning of Tract A and B. Suitability of the property for the uses to which it's been restricted, we don't know because there's no evidence that they have actually tried to market this property. Scroll down, please, Chris. D, I don't read well when it's moving, sorry. The extent to which the removal restrictions will detrimentally affect nearby properties. You're hearing from the landowners, the neighbors, about why they don't want this. E, the length of time it's been remained vacant. None of this property has remained vacant. It's in use today. except track C. Now, again, track C, different question perhaps. F, relative gain to the public health, safety, and welfare. Obviously allowing trucks to come and go in the backyards of residents. You're taking what is the most broad form of zoning we have, industrial, and putting residences in the middle of it. And to show you how stark that is, staff could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that industrial is the only zoning class in which you can't have a house, cannot have a house. But we're putting industrial next to residential in this case. And finally, the comprehensive plan does not call for industrial on this site, it calls for residential. And I really appreciate you listening. I think there's 2 or 3 main points here. One is this applicant has not complied with basic rules for getting a plan approved, getting a traffic study, providing a landscape design. If we had those, then we could consider something. What we have is a promise that someday, if and when they find an industrial user, then they'll do something about this. But I know how to stop trucks, put up a fence.
Okay, sorry, I'm gonna, the 4 minutes is up.
Yes, and I'm finished, thank you.
Questions by the commission?
I do have one, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Freeze.
Mr. Jarbo, do you have any knowledge the entranceway going from Burlingame Road into the northern entrance, is that public passage there?
Into the north entrance?
Yes.
It's there is a public frontage road off of Burlingame. When these homes were separated from their Burlingame frontage, the city or state, I don't know which, acquired it probably through eminent domain and acquired parts of their front yards and then built that frontage road. That's a public road.
And the entranceway from Burlingame Road into the north driveway from the new Burlingame to, I guess, technically what might be the old Burlingame where the houses are located, is that part at least considered public?
Yes.
At some point that becomes private.
It's public up to where, on some of the drawings, you can see that the north driveway that we've been talking about for the subject property kind of terminates at the same point as the front yards of the homes and as the east line of the cemetery. And my judgment is it's at that point it becomes private.
Thank you, sir. I have no further questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kopp.
Either a question for Mr. Jarbo or any of the other neighbors. In an effort to always try to find the simplest possible solution to a problem, I recognize that you've raised issues besides the traffic, but the existing uses are there, they generate traffic. How much of the objections that the neighbors have turns on the type and volume of traffic coming down Burlingame and specifically the use of that north entrance? Is that, if that problem could be resolved to the satisfaction of the neighbors, does everything else go away or not?
If I can get a second to answer it, and then I'll probably defer to Julie. I would probably say to my mother, who doesn't face the north frontage road, it's not as big an issue to her relative to the traffic there, but she does have an issue with all the clutter, the debris, the trucks, the mismanagement of the site behind her. Now, that being said, she is extremely worried, and I fear for her life every day that she is dealing with having to go along her street in front of her house where she should have a clear access to Burlingame Road to a point where there has now been a yield sign that creates the ability for the sports zone people to just ride on through them. And I think my brother Bob actually mentioned on Thursday that he actually had an event that actually occurred that day. So from an aspect of her just getting out. Relative to the North Drive, Julie, I would defer to you on, once again, how you would answer that question.
Matt, before you go to Julie, what's the speed limit? What's the speed limit on Burlingame at that point?
I don't know. Julie, do you know?
No. I'd like to know
35 or
the speed
45.
limit on the drive because they come barreling down that drive.
Bob, do you know what the speed limit is on Burlingame or Dan? Oops, you're not muted, or you're muted, Bob.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's 35, 40. I don't know. I go so slow because I get off the highway, but I think it's 35 or 40 is what it is.
Okay. Thank you.
It is 40 miles per hour. I'm looking at it on Street View right now. So.
Okay. As far as that entrance there by my parents, anytime you turn out, it's amazing that there hasn't been an accident yet and hadn't had somebody been killed, because the cars coming from and going to the sports zone are in a hurry to make their game times or be there when their coach wants them there, and trying to get out it's terrible, especially if you're an 87-year-old driver like my father. He won't even let my mom try it anymore. And also, when they lost their access to Burlingame Road, that was the city that did that. They didn't want that either, okay? And we've actually asked a couple times, why couldn't they get, for those 3 houses, have access all their own and close that off there? That would be a really good option too, so that they don't have the traffic, they don't have to try to cross traffic 2 ways. Because the way it's set up, if you can see the design, you're trying to pull out and go left, and there are cars coming in that you can't even see. I mean, you most of you commissioners have been to the sports zone, and if you turn down Burlingame Road and see what it's like trying to get back out. Turn down on our frontage road. I also like to mention about that landscape barrier. How are they going to do a landscape barrier? Why was there a landscape barrier along the road there by my parents' house along the drive?
Julie, I would no way to even have a 20-foot landscape buffer.
I know, they should just close the whole drive because there's no way for a buffer there.
Did we answer your question, Commissioner?
Well, one of them, and you just mentioned closing the North Drive. I don't know what public safety issues are associated with that, emergency vehicles and so forth. But I would mention to you, and I'm sure your attorneys told you this, that the trash and other debris that you're saying is existing there, and you have photos of, that's a code enforcement issue for the city of Topeka to take up, or a nuisance action. It's not a land use matter.
Right, the mattress, yeah, but the semi-tractor, the back parts of the semis being all around the place, that's part of the zoning violation, isn't it?
Okay, let me clarify, Julie. I'm not sure if we consider the trailer storage that's back there that's rusting, is that trash or is that equipment storage? The equipment storage and the trailers is a violation of the zoning. If it's considered trash, which maybe that's what the owner's doing, then yes, it would be a different enforcement. It's definitely trailers and it's equipment, which is in violation.
But the semis bring in these tractor trailers and they leave them there. You know, they got there through semis and they're down in down in the woods area. That's against the zoning. That's against the zoning.
Commissioner, are we answering your question?
Yeah, I think so. Mr. Chairman, if I could ask Mr. Jarbo a question or two. Mr. Jarbo, again, trying to reduce this down as much as possible, legitimately. And I understand the arguments that you're making, that the inconsistency with the future land use map is not it's not correct to characterize it as a violation. Your proposed use or existing uses are either consistent or inconsistent with the future land use map. And I don't know how much significance to give that argument, but I tend not to give it much at all. I am attentive to your concerns regarding the lack of any specificity as to any future use or how the property will be used. You know, if the PUD is granted by the city, but it is. Would you agree that it is correct that the city's regulations do not require straight up, just do not require a identification of a use as part of a rezoning?
Can you ask the question again? I'm not sure if I understood that.
Well, I was directing this at Mr. Jarbo, if he's still on the call.
I'm here.
The issue of the lack of an identified use as part of an application for a PUD. If I want to, and you may tell me that the PUD is different than a straight rezoning. If I want to rezone my property from residential to commercial, I don't have to identify the particular commercial use that I have that I'm proposing. The question is whether or not the commercial classification I'm asking for is appropriate at that location. Is it any different analysis with respect to a PUD?
No, I don't think it is. I think that's your statement is correct in terms of the City of Topeka zoning code. Where it has implications here is when we're thinking about an unidentified industrial zoning that we're putting next to a clearly residential use, being a cemetery and 3 houses, then those two are at opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of zoning code.
Well, it's true that what you do then when in a situation like that, from your viewpoint, your client's viewpoint, you would look at the most intense potential industrial use. And if there's a range there that of available industrial uses under the PUD as proposed, and you would be concerned about the most intense of those possible I-1 uses, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And in the PUD itself, one of the uses it talks about, and I don't have that in front of me at the moment, but one of the uses it talks about is repair of vehicles. But it doesn't even say that repair occurs indoors. Now, some of the other uses, it specifically says that those uses have to be inside a building. And so, you know, thinking about it from an interpretation standpoint, if in one place it says this use must occur inside, and you have another use which doesn't say inside or outside, then that implies it could be outside. And certainly my clients have experienced repair of trucks and other equipment on the land that this applicant is seeking to put in the PUD.
And that use is not occurring right now, to the best of your knowledge, is that right?
To the best of my knowledge, it's not occurring at this moment. That is correct.
Okay.
Vernon, I should add.
The other issue that's been raised, I want to touch on this if I could. And Mr. Jarbo, you I think mentioned this, and that is the setback requirement between residential and industrial. And if I'm reading the master plan notes correctly, it's just a 30-foot setback from the property line. Is that correct? And if it's not, I hope staff would correct me on that. But I think I'm saying a 30-foot setback requirement.
I'm not talking about setback. I'm talking about how wide should the landscape barrier be.
No, I understand, but I'm talking about setback.
I have no reason. Yeah, I have no reason to disagree with your comment on setback.
Well, what's your client's situation or perspective regarding setback of just 30 feet?
Well, if there was a 100-foot landscape barrier, we wouldn't care because you wouldn't be inside 30 feet. But some greater setback than that would obviously be better. I mean, obviously from our perspective, the best is you either turn this down or you tell the applicant to go back and do the work properly by getting a landscape plan and getting a traffic analysis. And then we have a hearing based on what we know.
Okay, if you had a traffic analysis based upon one of the more intense uses possible under the proposed PUD, and you had a greater setback and a greater landscaped area, does that solve? And then you deal also with the north entranceway off of Burlingame. If those were all dealt with in a PUD application, does everybody go home happy?
My clients still aren't happy that Burlingame was improved, obviously. So I'm not going, you're not going to pull me into that conversation. I don't think everybody goes home happy. Obviously, they would be less unhappy if you had a greater setback, 100-foot landscape barrier. You required a fence now, so the trucks cannot get across track A into track B. Truckers are pretty smart. They don't very often pull their trucks into some place they can't get out of that's inconvenient to them. I would guess most truckers are going to do that exactly once.
Well, I've taken up too much of everybody's time here, but let me go back to that entranceway just for a moment. You had mentioned, I think, Mr. Jarbo, possibility of putting a gate on that entrance.
No, I did not discuss a gate. I think okay. I think maybe Mike did, but the idea of the gate was in the fence separating tract A from tract B. There would need to be a gate for purposes of emergency vehicles.
Right. Okay. So, and that is, I mean, emergency vehicles are important consideration here. But you've probably seen places around the country where semi-tractors are discouraged by a barrier placed overhead, reducing the clearance. And I don't know if that's something to be considered here. You have to allow fire trucks and any other emergency vehicles to be able to transit a barrier like that. But an overhead barrier a possibility?
I have seen that. I think my idea of just having the developer, he's agreed to build the fence. The applicants agreed to that, but he just doesn't want to build it now. And all I'm saying is, if you're going to approve this PUD, build it now. That will properly protect the owners from the semis.
Well, how many of these things are we talking about? Landscaping, limiting the access off of the Burlingame, the other issues. How much of that could turn on when there actually is a use coming through the door?
I think it needs to turn on now, though. I mean, these uses that are industrial are already going on.
Okay. Thank you, Vernon.
Thank you.
Could I get a clarification on these uses? So if this PUD was approved tonight, then the uses that staff has dictated on the document would clean up what's going on right now, the way it appears. Tract A is only going to be for O&I 2. There's no trucks allowed on that property. So that cleans up that part of it for Tract A. And like I said, I'm just trying to get a clarification, and maybe staff could chime in. So then Tract B is only used for the existing recreation, the type 1 as it is now, and then it lists five or six different uses that could actually be used on there. But none of those actually talk about the truck storage and the truck usage. And so that's what I kind of needed a clarification on. Yeah, right there. It just seems that this PUD is trying to clean up these violations that are going on right now. And if it is approved, do they immediately have to these go into effect right away, and all these things have to be fixed?
If I can interrupt, Vernon, you had mentioned that there was one item in here, the machinery equipment repairing doesn't qualify if it's indoor or outdoor. Also, type 2 self-storage allows indoor and outdoor as well.
Commissioner Werner, I'll respond to your question. This is Mike Hall.
Yes.
So you are correct in some of the things you just said. Tract A is the tract that's immediately adjacent to a residential use. Tract B is not immediately adjacent to a residential use. It's immediately adjacent to the cemetery. So with the PUD as proposed, Tract A would be limited to O&I 2 uses. So all the uses that are occurring there would be allowed there, except the truck. Well, actually, normally it would allow the truck driver training, but this PUD would require that no semi-tractor trailer trucks. Semi-tractor trailers would be allowed on tract A. And as proposed, they would not be allowed to use the north entrance. Tract B, there's a lot of discussion about referring to it as an industrial use, but it limits quite a lot what is allowed that's industrial. One alternative is you could look at some of those uses listed and say they're just not appropriate. But the idea is what we try to do with working with the applicant is remove those uses that are most likely to create a negative impact or an adverse impact. So you're not, for example, you're allowed artisan manufacturing, but not full manufacturing. So you're not going to see like a research plant there or anything like that. There's no outdoor storage. As far as the machinery, equipment, repair, and restoration, our intent was that all be indoor by the note, but it can certainly be clarified to state that that activity would only happen indoors. And that, I suppose the applicant would need to respond to whether that's adequate or not. I think the other thing this tries to do is to provide a situation where there is a buffer between the industrial uses and even the O&I 2 uses, between those uses and the residential uses and the cemetery. The buffer is 20 feet, a landscape buffer. That's a 20-foot landscape buffer is what's required in the most, I'd say the most restrictive cases where you have a land use that's adjoining an arterial. We require a 20-foot landscape buffer between the arterial and the parking lot. So yeah, it's intended to take some of the worst aspects of this, mainly the truck traffic and the outdoor storage, and not allow them any further.
So will the truck traffic be allowed on tract B?
Truck traffic would be allowed on tract B, but only with access from the south entrance. I should also point out is one of the challenges if you put up a fence on tract B immediately, that means all the sports zone traffic would have to take the south entrance, or there would have to be some kind of gate for a person-sized gate for them to access the sports zone from the tract A parking lot.
Mike, I'd like to point out that the truck driving and training school is in track A. That is where the location is. That is where the people will go to.
And where they practice their driving, they have to go on tract A to go down there to go back behind, because that's the only road going back there. So if they still have the truck driving school, those truckers who are practicing their trucking would go onto tract A to go down into the wooded area to practice their driving.
Mr. Chairman, this is my call again. I'd just like to respond to that if I could.
Please, sir.
So as proposed, the PUD master plan does not allow trucks to enter the north entrance. The applicant has agreed to that. So they're not going to be able to use that entrance for truck driver training. Is there going to be an office for truck driver licensing or CDL licensing in tract A? Yes, that's the proposed PUD would allow that, but not the actual truck driver training on tract A.
But the truck, to get to where they practice the driving, they have to go through tract A, because that's the only access down into the wooded area. I'm not talking about the entrance by my parents' house. I'm talking about where the White Line School does their practicing, which is in the wooded area behind the sports zone, and they have to use the one drive. They can come in the other entrance, but they still have to go on tract A, because that's the only driveway back into the wooded area.
Julie, Julie, I would just point out that we're also dealing with an owner who's shown that he can't comply with issues. So,
well, but even if he wants to comply, unless they're going to move where they do their driving school, and they have it all set up back there, where they practice the parking and turning and everything. It's on one of the pictures that I have. They have to, there's only one road down there into like the ball diamonds and the football fields. And that's the only drive they have. And that's on track, that starts out on track A.
Will you pull up the site plan so we can look at that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I could, this is Kevin Holland, Cook, Flat, and Strobel.
Yes, sir.
That access road is on the south side of the arena, which would be track B.
All right, we got the site plan coming up.
Just left of your cursor.
No. It's right here.
I think it would be easier if you had the Google map or whatever that actually shows the actual pathways.
Yeah, the aerial photograph depicts it more clearly.
Yeah.
Regardless, I think we, as an ownership, the homeowners are still extremely concerned that that we have a use that doesn't work with the R1 use, and we're not being abided by any proper separation from it. And I think, the other hand, we're dealing with an owner who hasn't abided by the rules and regulations, and has put my mother and my aunt and uncle in harm's way. The day we want to deal with the buffer. If we'd had an applicant who was nice and fair and decent and wanted to talk to the owners about the right way to do things, then maybe we wouldn't be so upset. But yes, we're upset because they haven't done what's right. And my father, God bless his soul, always said, do what's right all the time.
Mr. Chairman, Kevin Holland, Cook, Flat, and Strobel, we have given Mr. Masalonis 8 minutes, and I think we continue on down the same street.
Questions from commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, it's Commissioner Messina. I do have a question for the applicant. What changes have been made since September to come into any kind of compliance with your current zoning, if any?
Yeah, the truck school, what's the name of it?
White line.
White line has been modified. He has now instructed all of his trucks to use the south entrance, coming and going. He has 2 trucks. Those are the trucks that use the access to the south of the arena to go back onto the gravel. What they do, and they're not repairing trucks. That's not a truck repair. They are inspecting trucks. They're showing drivers what they're supposed to do at the beginning of their day to go around and inspect their trucks. If I can, I know several times they've asked why we're doing this. Mike Morse with Kansas Commercial directed us towards this way. He said that this property, they tried to sell that as a sporting complex to give it a little more flexibility. This is the direction we were told to go from a marketing study from Kansas Commercial. Okay. And on the original CUP, we were injured as much as anybody because everybody else's access point off of Burlingame now become our access point. The access point we had our own access point before all of them got jammed in together as well. So we would definitely love it if the city of Topeka would give the residences their own access point. That might be, I doubt they would approve that, but we would not oppose that whatsoever.
I should point out that Mike Morse is an office-focused broker.
Thank you. And then I have a couple questions for staff. So what does typical enforcement, this is all new to me, what does typical enforcement in compliance with zoning look like for a case that's something similar to this, if it's not up for change?
Mike, I will try and handle this one. Commissioner Messina, so a typical enforcement process is not probably what many people think, which is we don't go out and write tickets or anything like that. It's a fairly lengthy process. First of all, we only have the capacity to react by complaint only. We have one zoning enforcement officer for 60 square miles of the city. So we go by complaint, we go out and investigate. Once we cite the violation, we typically would ask the owner to correct it voluntarily. And
trucks is on B.
and we give them that time, typically 30 days to correct the violation, depending on how egregious it is or there's a safety issue involved. If they do not correct it voluntarily, it will get sent to prosecution. Prosecution over in the city attorney's office then would ultimately file a case in district or municipal court, and it would be heard. I can tell you from my experience is that could take quite a long time to get heard. Again, unless there is a safety issue or something very egregious going on that is threatening to the public, those tend to get docketed for several. It could be several months. I've been part of cases that have not come before the judge for 6-7 months. So it can be drawn out at that point, and then the court will hear it and ultimately make a decision to find the matter to be enforced, and that decision would be final, although it could be appealed. So, that's the typical process of a land use violation. Sometimes there's a land use violation that is what I would call more, or I should say less reoccurring, meaning if there was a condition on that land that required, let's say, somebody not to do something for a particular time period or even a particular use, and that use is and that use happens in violation of the zoning. Let's say they discontinue the use, then there is no case at that point. It's not a punitive type of a matter. The case we would go out and assess that the use has been removed, and the case would be violation case would be dropped. That doesn't mean people don't come back out and reestablish uses, and it's sort of can become a cat and mouse thing, which is very frustrating. But that's just the reality of how zoning enforcement works. Does that help answer the question?
Yes, that does. Can you recap for me under their current zoning, or someone else on staff, doesn't have to be you, under their current zoning, what exactly is in compliance right now? So they've moved they said they moved the driving so that they're trying not to be on track day with the company that they have. So it's the daycare that's not compliance, the trucking business, and the DMV. Those are only the three things right now that is in compliance. Is that right with their current zoning?
Are you, I'm sorry, Commissioner Messina, that are not in compliance?
Right. Or that are in compliance. That are not in compliance. I'm losing my mind. It's getting late. Okay. That are not currently in code for what the zoning should be.
Mike help me, but I'll take a shot here. Yes, I think you got that generally right. So the office use, hence the DMV, the truck teaching, the daycare, and even the open storage that's been cited, those are not permitted under the current CUP and underlying zoning. Did I get that right, Mike?
Truck driving school is not in compliance because the truck driving school, it was never approved.
Correct.
And it's not allowed on either tract A or tract B currently under the current zoning.
So under the proposed one, those will be approved in tract B for the truck, specifically for the truck driving?
So this is where it gets a little complicated. So if you look at Tract A, under the proposed zoning, it would allow O&I2 uses. O&I2 uses allow government services, which is DMV. DMV includes the CDL, also a government service, so that's allowed in O&I2. And O&I2 also allows vocational schools, which could include truck driver training. But what this PUD does is it restricts that a bit more by saying there can't be any trucks on Tract A. So it's O&I, Tract A as proposed is O&I2, but with a few more restrictions than a typical O&I2 zoning would have.
Okay. Okay, I think I'm good on questions right now. I'll pass it off to someone else. Thanks.
I guess clarification from staff on I know we've talked about a landscape buffer. The 20-foot landscape buffer, that is only as a part of changing the use currently in Tract A and Tract B to something different. Is that the way that's written on the PUD?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it'd be triggered by a change in use. Keep in mind, typically, when we have a requirement, it's triggered, it's implemented through a request for permits or a request for a certificate of occupancy for a change of use. Because in that situation, the owner is requesting something from the city can withhold it until they comply with the zoning requirement. If something is immediately required, when there's not that hanging over an owner's head, our way of enforcing that leads us back to our less than robust zoning enforcement process, which Bill just explained.
So in rezoning, going from something that's non-compliant to compliant, that is not triggering and making that request?
It could be. It's just a matter of implementation and how successful you can implement that requirement. So let's say one of the conditions was that immediately a fence had to be installed. So a fence, maybe it has to be installed within a certain amount of time. So that means the owner would have to install that fence. They have to come in and apply for a permit to install the fence. And then if they didn't, then we would have to take a zoning enforcement action and follow that lengthy process with some level of uncertainty. The same is true of the landscape plan or having landscaping required. Same situation. One thing I feel like I need to address, since we're on that topic of landscaping, is one reason we do not require a specific landscape plan prior to actually a project happening or a change of use happening is because the particular needs or the particular requirements could change based on the project. And we are reluctant to have the PUD plan be so detailed that it's going to have to be amended. Because unless it's a very minor amendment, then it's going to have to go through this whole process again. And if it is a minor amendment, then we have to try to determine what's appropriate and work with the decision that was made. So it gets a little unwieldy. This is a program PUD. It's not a detailed PUD, and that was intentional because we really don't know what could come forth.
I got a question for the owner.
Go ahead.
Have they actively tried to sell it as is, as a residential? There wouldn't be so much objection if there may be a retirement home company that may want to move in and between the sports zone and the retirement community would be a perfect match for this area.
Retirement community would not actually fit in residential. This is Kevin Holland, Cook, Platte, and Strobel. That is correct, Michael?
Retirement home would require a change in zoning, yes.
Can you, I'm sorry, this is Commissioner Messina. Can you legally sell it at this point while it's out of compliance zoning?
Yeah, I mean, no violation.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have one question for staff, if I could.
Mr. Kopp.
Thank you. Traffic impact analysis. I'm not clear. Let's say this goes forward, is approved as presented, and I want to buy track C, and I want to make an I want to use one of the industrial uses that's permitted under the PUD. If that is considered a substantial change of use, then traffic engineering catches it and may tell me that I have to do a TIA. Is that correct?
Commissioner Kalp, there's a kind of a set of guidelines they use. If it's a land use that that involves a substantial change in traffic volume, it would require a traffic study. And on track C as proposed, it's not restricted by any PUD standards. It's just I-1 uses.
Okay, but if I'm told that a traffic impact analysis has to be done, and that is done, and the result of it is that that the city says certain improvements have to be made to the roadway or access points, whatever it is, that is a requirement for me in order to get a building permit, because I already have my zoning. So is it a requirement that I have to meet in order to pull the building permit?
If there are requirements that come out of a traffic study, they have to be completed as part of the building permit. And normally, let's say there are physical improvements, those would have to be done before the final inspection and a certificate of occupancy is granted for the project.
Right, and so those improvements I'm told they have to be made. I refuse to make them, I decline to make them, and the result of that is I just don't get my building permit. I still have my zoning, that's not at risk, but I don't get a building permit to build the use that I propose on my property.
Either A, don't get a building permit, or you don't get your certificate of occupancy, because you could get a building permit, it could have improvements on plans, but at some point you just run out of money or decide you don't want to follow the plans, then the city wouldn't approve the final project and issue a certificate of occupancy. The certificate of occupancy is the enforcement mechanism, typically.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Questions, commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for staff. So
yes, sir.
If the current use, let's say the DMV is not allowed, and we change it tonight to allow it, would that not be triggering a landscape review because now it's a new use? Or do we assume that nothing's there now illegal? Or how does that work?
I'll try to answer that question. I think there's some uncertainty. So they're already there, they're occupying it. They're not applying for any permits. I'd say typically at this point, we wouldn't say you need to come back and put in landscaping. We didn't require it in 2012 when there was a change of use. And actually, typically, just a change of use alone doesn't trigger a landscaping requirement. Some of the thresholds that trigger a landscape requirement are an expansion of the building by 50% or more, or an expansion of the existing parking lot by 50% or more. Those would typically trigger the landscape requirement. So the landscape requirement that's in the PUD as proposed is more rigorous, I would say, than would typically apply. Although I personally appreciate the fact that, Sports Zone didn't put the landscaping in back then. I don't know the full situation. And I think it would benefit by having landscaping there. It's unwieldy to try to implement that and enforce it without some kind of permit process involved.
So the DMV, they got a permit back in 2012. Once they moved in, is that correct?
So we only know what our records tell us, Commissioner. We issued permits for a remodel of the building. And
can I help you on this, gentlemen? This is Kevin Holland again. Our owners would agree to do the landscape immediately, if that helps the situation.
Okay.
100-foot buffer would be nice.
A 100-foot buffer is pretty unrealistic no matter where you are in town.
I have a question.
Mr. Freed.
So there's been some discussion about other access for the residents. Is there a reason legally that the road Burlingame couldn't be connected? It looks like there's a pathway down to a church just north of those residences. Is there a reason there couldn't be a connection that way? So the residents who are speaking here tonight would have access separate from the north exit, even when it's just sports zone traffic and not truck traffic?
Commissioner, I'll try to respond to that. I think some traffic analysis would determine whether that was appropriate or not. It might be. I think then it would just be a question of who would pay to construct that roadway connection.
I will note there's substantial grade from my mother's property up to that connection.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, other questions?
Mr. Chairman, if I can just pose a question kind of back to all the commissioners of if anyone's wrapped their head around this on what they're thinking for, not, it doesn't have to be like a motion, but I'm kind of lost on it at this point, what we would want to put a motion forward for tonight after what we've heard. If anyone has any thoughts on that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I've got one thought, which I guess I would share. That is, I thought from looking at the materials, I thought I knew what was going on and what would be a fair outcome. But there have been a lot of things floating around tonight. And while the applicant has waited a long time to have action by the Planning Commission, I'm not certain that, it seems unclear to me as to whether or not an additional delay, a month or so, really works a hardship, and they can respond to that. But we just heard that the applicant is saying that they could place some landscaping right away. That's positive. We've heard comments regarding the north entrance off Burlingame. I wouldn't mind having some discussion about whether or not this matter be tabled and ask the applicant to come back with their last best offer, I guess.
I would agree with that.
This is Commissioner Ringler. I think I agree too. I was going to just point out that I have kind of two observations after this whole discussion. And one is that I understand the history of the property and the families there. Unfortunately, this part of the community is just moving toward industrialization and away from residential resources. And it may be unfortunate, but that's just the way that it looks like it's going. And the other observation is that I'm a little lost too on why this has to be done right now. So I would agree with Commissioner Kopp on that one.
Commissioner Kennard, in agreement with what's already been said, but is anybody else of the opinion that perhaps we also need the traffic study done?
Yes, I think we need the traffic study. This is Commissioner Lawson.
This is Mr. Armstrong again. I guess I'm as defined in there. I don't know what the traffic study findings are really going to help you if we're diverting trucks to the south entrance, and there's no proposed change in what's going on out there. I don't know what we're looking for from a traffic analysis perspective that would have any impact in what we're talking about.
Mr. Chairman, could I mention that I'm kind of intrigued with the idea of a traffic impact statement as well, or analysis, but I don't know the cost or in time or money to do that. But one thing that we haven't talked about, obviously the neighbors are concerned about the volume of traffic and the type of traffic going down Burlingame. There is another industrial use to the south of Track C, which is, I think, a beer distributor. I don't know how much of the traffic originates from tracks A, B, C, and how much of it is, how much of the traffic is due to uses further to the south. And a TIA would measure that if we don't have that information available already.
This is Commissioner Kennard again. Chairman Armstrong, in response to your question, what I think it would give us, there seems to be a dispute between the people in the neighborhood and the applicant as to exactly what the use is. And presumably it would give us that.
Well, jumping in, I guess I agree with Commissioner Armstrong. If we move all the trucks off that, that takes care of the issue. There will still be a traffic issue with the sports use, but that's already occurring anyway, and that was presumably anticipated under the conditional use. So I don't know that if we move all the truck traffic out of the north entrance and we keep it all off Track A, then I personally don't see the need for a traffic impact assessment, at least for this zoning moving forward.
And maybe just a minute, Corey, maybe clarification from staff. The page 8 statement about City of Topeka Engineering Division initiating a traffic analysis, that was to analyze existing conditions, right? We're not requiring a future traffic study based on future uses until those would be defined by an applicant and we would know how to generate said proposed traffic and compare that to existing conditions?
Yes, that's to analyze existing conditions, mainly, and how to improve that intersection to improve safety and traffic flow. But I think if there was a change to eliminating truck traffic, I wonder if that could possibly be included in the scope of that.
Could we also, because you raised the safety issue, which I hadn't thought of on the traffic study, can we also go back and would that then evaluate whether or not there's been this discussion about a stop sign versus a yield sign? Would that all be covered as part of that traffic analysis?
Yes.
For the current uses.
For the current uses, yes.
Mr. Chair, this is Bill Fiander.
Yes, sir.
Point with the traffic analysis, they are waiting to have the use reestablished at the sports zone to do an existing condition analysis. So if everybody, I just want everybody to be aware that that analysis of so-called existing conditions may not take place right away. And so we might be pushing this off more than just a month if that is something that the commissioners would want before the next meeting.
Hey, Mr. Chair, Kevin Holland again, Cook Flat and Strobel. We do not disagree. We will table and go forward in the future after the traffic study results are in.
We don't want to do traffic.
The city's traffic study is in.
All right. The applicant has agreed to table until we have traffic study in hand that addresses existing conditions. Mr. Finder, do we need action on that? Do we need to propose that it be tabled and vote on that?
I would, yeah, sure. I think the commission should.
The traffic analysis, there are other issues that have been discussed tonight. Would they be everything on the table? The applicant has been listening to everything and again, setbacks, landscaping, ingress, egress, all of these issues. They would come back with with their newest thoughts on how to respond to the concerns of the neighbors.
So is that a motion?
Well, I want to know if that's going to be part of the motion or if we're just talking about traffic impact analysis.
Oh, no, I was going to suggest that a motion be made to continue the item until staff can present to the commission the findings of a traffic impact analysis, as well as the applicant's consideration of any alternative conditions that they want to present to the commission.
So moved.
Could I, I was looking at this thing, we talked about the lot A and lot B. We talked about having a fence there. I'm wondering, and maybe it's a simple thing to do, but if you had, like the concrete type barricade or something there along the parking area where you still let vehicles in, cars in, trucks in, but a semi couldn't get through there, so it would limit them going onto property A. And maybe that's something that can be looked at as well. Something that keeps semis from going to property A, but lets cars still filter through unimpeded. I think for me, that would make me feel better about that. So just kind of throwing that out there.
We have a motion by Mr. Freed.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion this evening? All right, Chris, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Armstrong,
Aye.
Mr. Dean,
Aye.
Mr. Freed,
Aye.
Mr. Canar,
Aye.
Mr. Kaup,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson,
Aye.
Ms. Messina,
Aye.
Ms. Ringler,
Aye.
and Mr. Warner.
Aye.
Motion passes 9-0.
Move on to action item D3A20/02, 60 North Subdivision. P20/09, an approximate 74-acre subdivision on property located at 3325 Northwest 25th Street. Is Mr. Warner? Oh, Mr. Warner has joined us.
You betcha. Thank you, Chairman. As you mentioned, it's a 74-acre subdivision at 3325 Northwest 25th. They are requesting annexation. The use of the property is projected to be industrial with multiple small office warehouse type industries. There is no immediate proposal for development. The reason we are talking about annexation for this project is that the project will be connecting to City of Topeka sewer and water. Just for your information and a kind of refresher on the rules, Development that connects to water and sewer outside the city is required by the City of Topeka utility rules to annex and plat. And they have taken care of that plat, and now we're talking about the annexation. This is considered a unilateral annexation. The property owner has consented to the annexation. The property is contiguous to the city. This type of annexation requires City of Topeka governing body approval only. Planning Commission review of this kind of annexation is not required by state statute. However, the Land Use and Growth Management Plan establishes a policy that the Planning Commission should review annexations greater than 10 years for consistency with growth management principles of the Land Use and Growth Management Plan. To that end, the property lies within the employment tier of the urban growth area. This employment tier contains areas that are zoned and planned for industrial type uses. Subject property is designated urban growth area employment by the Topeka Future Land Use Map. So therefore, industrial uses are consistent with a future employment area. I will note that future street improvements will be considered as the property develops. Traffic improvement analysis will be required at the time of development and will be reviewed for those improvements. Staff recommendation is that annexing the subject property is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for staff, Mr. Warner? So there actually is no applicant then on the annexation case, or it's just the memo is a little different than our normal format. Oh, so 60 Inc. would be the applicant?
Yes.
Okay. Question for staff. Is this a public hearing?
No.
Okay. I didn't think so.
Mr. Chairman, if you're ready for a motion, I'll offer a motion.
Yes, sir.
I would offer the motion that the Planning Commission finds the proposed annexation to be consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Second, Commissioner Kennard.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I think it looks like it makes sense to me. Appreciate the information, Mr. Warner. No further discussion. Chris, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Warner?
Aye.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
Ms. Messina?
Aye.
Ms. Lawson?
Aye.
Mr. Kalp?
Aye.
Mr. Kennard?
Aye.
Mr. Freed?
Aye.
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Motion passes 9-0.
Thank you, Mr. Warner. Moving on to action item number 4, review approval of Topeka Planning Commission bylaws.
Mr. Chair, this is Bill Fyander. I'll put this back at the commission if they want to review this with your permission tonight. We can put this on the next agenda and review it just as easy. It's given the hour that the length of this meeting. Unless anybody is chomping at the bit to get into bylaws at this hour, we would welcome a deferment.
I would so move deferring the bylaws to next month.
Commissioner Freed seconds.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Anyone jumping in to do it this evening? Commissioner Messina really wants to get into it, I can tell.
Totally.
All right, Chris, will you take the roll, please?
Mr. Armstrong,
Aye.
Mr. Dean,
Aye.
Mr. Freed,
Aye.
Mr. Canar,
Aye.
Mr. Kaup,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson,
Aye.
Ms. Messina,
Aye.
Ms. Ringler,
Aye.
and Mr. Werner.
Aye.
Passes 9-0.
Mr. Finder, further communications this evening? Maybe a potential in-face meeting next month? Any projections on that?
Yes, I'm a betting man, and I will take that bet. I think we will be in person. And if I lose that bet, don't. I didn't bet anything here, so I do think that's what we're heading towards. I don't know how we'll handle the public yet, but there will be some metering of public coming back into the chambers, and so. Fortunately, there'll be some council meetings before that we get a cleaner view of how to proceed. But yeah, I hope to be back there next month. And with that, I don't have any other communications tonight.
Thank you, sir. Just want to say thanks to Chris. I know you're doing like 4 jobs there tonight and really scrambling, but I think it went very nicely all on Zoom tonight, and thanks for coordinating all of that. Much appreciated.
Mr. Chairman, I motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second for adjournment. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you all in person next month.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.